Hello and welcome to episode 21 of That 60s Recording Podcast, the podcast that has conversations inspired by the golden era of recording. Hope you've all had a fantastic couple of weeks, and this week we are continuing this short and sweet conversation with legendary producer Shel Talmy. Talks a little bit more about working at Decca and has some really interesting sort of nuggets of information about generally producing and how his thoughts on the music industry, and also some listening recommendations, which I will talk to you a little bit more about at the end. I don't think there's any more sort of parish notices, so I'm going to dive straight in. So here we go, Shel Talmy, Part 2. What was working at Decca like, sort of in comparison to your experiences at Conway? How was it moving into what?
Well, it's a totally different situation. I mean, Roper, their studios were way apart from where the offices were. The offices were, I forget somewhere near the river, and the studios are in West Hampstead. So I used to check in every now and then, go to the offices, but that was it. There was nothing. I didn't have an office there or anything like that. I wasn't required to be there. Hello.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I'm there. It petered down a little bit. Sorry. Okay. So, and then in terms of practically. I'm thinking more like it on the recording side of things. How did sort of the gear there differ from what you'd used before? Like what you experienced?
Exactly the same. Almost exactly the same. That's something I think that wound up being. IBC turned out to be my favorite studio because of the fact they were the most ahead of tech stuff of what was happening, and they built a lot of their own things, so they were better than others. But generally speaking, tape machines were the same, and boards were the same, and all that kind of stuff. And it was just it may have been different brands, but it amounted to the same thing.
So you started there in '62, and then in '63 is when you recorded "You Really Got Me," which then led on to you working with The Who, because they were impressed with the sound on that record. A couple of years later, right. That came about. Would you mind filling in the gaps of that little story there?
Fill in the gaps?
Yeah, so not fill in the gaps. I mean, just expand on that. So you worked with the Kinks in '63, and then how did it come about?
My first hit was with the Bachelors, by the way.
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
And I've done some other. Anyways, the Kinks, as you said, the Who were impressed with what I did with the Kinks. I was contacted by a lady who was working part time for me, was asked by their then manager, who was Kit Lambert, who turned out to be one of my worst people I've ever met in my life. Would I come down and see the band who were playing at a church hall? And I said, yeah, sure. I'm out. I'm out looking for talent. And it took me virtually any time, but always when they started playing, I said, fine, I will sign them, because they were obviously terrific and probably the best hard rock or rock and roll band I heard, because the Kinks obviously did other things that the Who did not do. They were more, Ray was much more almost a spokesman for the English way of life and stuff like that. That was not the Who. So they were, I thought, the best rock band I'd heard since I arrived in London.
I love the idea of you going to watch them in a sort of church hall or village hall, and that being the first place you saw them, and then obviously they went on to have a huge career, and you sort of it feels like a fairy tale, like plucked them out of a tiny situation.
Well, I don't know about plucking,
The wrong word to use, maybe.
they were, I thought, an extremely good band. And I thought, yes, I could definitely work with these guys. And I did absolutely expect to have hits. And in fact, I never produced anything with them but a hit. So my belief turned out to be accurate.
So this was around 1965 that the My Generation album was recorded, and in that same year you ended up setting up Planet Records. Is that correct?
Yes.
So you clearly have an enormously strong work ethic and a bit of an entrepreneurial streak of just wanting to find ways to do things. What?
I thought I was wound up. I mean, in retrospect, I had not realized how many hours I was working. But I acquired an historian who was also the custodian of my tapes and things like that. And he knows way more about what I've done than I know what I've done. And I'm astonished at how much I actually did. So, I guess I stuck to it. Yeah, I was into it, and I wanted to do it properly.
What led to you setting the label up? Why did you decide that's something you needed to do?
Well, because people were doing it. Andrew Oldham had done it. I thought I could do it, and in some ways it was the right thing to do. In the bad way was that I did it with Phillips, which was a total disaster, and why I closed the label down, because they absolutely did nothing. So,
one of the bands that you did work with, The Creation, are obviously quite a well-known cult band now.
Well, The Creation, which I've said in many interviews, was the band that should have been superstars, and I could not keep them from breaking up. I had just made a deal for them with Atlantic that would have been huge. This is after they were just having major records all over Europe, and they broke up, and consequently all they become is a cult band, unfortunately, as opposed to the superstars they should have been.
What was it about them that you thought was particularly? I mean, I know you've described in interviews that they're your most important work.
Excellent music. Eddie Phillips is, I think, in my opinion, the best unknown guitarist that's ever been in England. There's still tons of people who have no idea who he is. He invented using the violin bow. He is a brilliant guitarist. He's still out there, and he's still working, and he's still doing that stuff. And between he and Kenny Pickett, they wrote some great songs. That was the other point, is material. I was always extremely cognizant of what kind of songs can these people write. And I was fortunate enough to have the Kinks and the Who and the Creation, all of whom had terrific writers.
That is it's something that comes up often, is there's songs, and obviously the songs have to be extremely strong, and with that in mind, I'm very conscious that I'm picking up on your real sort of signposts acts that you've worked with, but obviously you have a history with David Bowie before or Bowie, depending on how you want to pronounce it.
No, I call him David Bowie, and he really was Davy Jones, as you know.
Yes.
No, he's another one who's writing, I thought, really good stuff, and I thought he was going to be a superstar, and of course he became one. Unfortunately, we were about 5 or 6 years ahead of the market. So,
so you moved out of. So sorry, you worked with Decca when you were originally hired by Decca. Were you hired as an independent producer, or?
That's one of my brash things. When I walked in, I said to Dick, I said, "By the way, I'm an independent producer, which means that I get royalties because at that point in time, no producer in England was getting royalties. They were strictly on a weekly salary.
Okay.
And Dick, who was very pro-American, got it, and he said, "Okay, we'll do that." So that's what it does. That was part of what I did when I walked in because I didn't care. I wasn't going to be there, but of course I wound up being there.
Did it? So obviously, apart from sort of royalty side of things, did it mean that you got more choice in who you worked with, or did it?
Well, I got a choice of who I worked with. Not initially. I was given various people. I was given people like the Bachelors and Clodagh Rogers and a couple others, and then of course, they wanted me to see if I could bring people in, which is how I got turned off the decade. Because I brought them both, Georgie Fame and Manfred Mann, and they turned them both down on me. I thought, I think it's time for me to become an independent producer, like I said I was.
I mean that that was exactly where I was leading to next, about you moving on to sort of being independent, and that meant that you could presumably use other studios and
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's exactly what I did.
um
I didn't even bother trying to take the Kinks into deck. I went straight to Pi.
okay. So you must have had a bit of a well, certainly sounds like you've had a turbulent relationship with sort of management and people who aren't involved directly in music making, and I guess that's the same in the Decca situation as well, is it?
Yeah, pretty much. Albeit that then I am bound to say that there were more music people actually working at labels as opposed to now where there are no music people working at labels. So.
Well, yes. So, sort of towards the end of the 60s, you must have been flooded with requests of people trying to work with you. I mean, what was, how, I mean, and I've also read that you started then moving into film music, which I suppose now is that linked back to what you were doing before you even did music?
Of course, yeah, sure. It had a connection. I like doing film music, and we did a few things, and I'd like to have done more, but it didn't work out like that. But yeah, I did several things with films, and that was fun. And of course, the creation. I then started licensing, and creation stuff has been in a whole bunch of films as well as commercials. So
That's something I took from. I listened to them a fair bit through for the research for this interview, and that's something I took from them. Is it's very not cinematic in like a John Williams sort of sense, but you can definitely hear. You can hear in the pictures in sort of what they're singing, or in the style of the music that it is something I took. So I'm not surprised to hear that, to be honest.
Okay, well, good. I picked up on it.
I wonder. I've actually just I've said painting sort of pictures there in sort of your head, and I wonder if I think it was Jeff Emmerich described his style of production, if you like, as painting a picture. What was when you were working with an artist? How would you describe your sort of outlook on it?
Well, I think painting a picture is not totally out of where I suppose all of us who produce do. I've apparently got a knack, because I've talked to other producers about it, and so some claim they do. I'm not sure how many actually do. I've always been able to hear in my head what I thought the finished product should sound like, and so I was working towards that, and that's kind of how I was operating. I mean, with differences here in that that wasn't cast in cement. I was lots more flexible than that, but I had an idea of where the thing should wind up sounding like, and I worked toward that unless things occurred to me if I was in the studio, or we took a left turn or a right turn or something, did something else. But yeah, I think every producer has to have some um, idea of what they want to wind up with. Otherwise, there's no point in it.
Well, yeah, absolutely. So you're almost hearing an artist brings you a song and it's a bare bones, and you're hearing an arrangement and sort of in
Yeah,
your head
true.
at that point, or and also going with it as it progresses and taking influence from what happens along
No,
that process.
I think it pretty much happens from the get-go. If I hear a song I really like that I want to record, I'm pretty much already processing uh, an arrangement and how I think it's going to sound like finished, when I finish mixing and all that kind of stuff, and what has to go into it, including other instruments or backing vocals or whatever. I mean, all that seems to be part of the whole. And I'm looking towards the whole, even though I have parts to work with at that point in time.
It's really interesting hearing, or just sort of hearing the it's almost behind the scenes of how you go about doing something. I mean, there's I one of the things that I guess differs from the sort of early and middle of the 60s towards the end of the 60s is that and you can obviously correct me on this, is that studio time, it seems to get longer. So the sort of restricted versions of studios seem to not happen so much towards the end of the 60s. And rather than going into the studio with an arrangement already planned and rehearsed, you have time in the studio to spend on.
Okay, well, you're talking about something that I have had discussions with numerous people numerous times. So I'll reiterate in that in the 60s, if you were a really good band, you would be able to do at least 4 tracks during a 3-hour session. If you were a lousy band, then you were incapable of even getting close to doing that. And then it did a 180 and the reverse happened. So the more time you took, if you took months to do something, you were really cool. Not for me, but that's how some of the bands sold themselves and managed to get the labels to go along with it, and I guess good luck to them. I don't think it improved the music.
It's an it's an interesting way to think about it. I quite like that. That the way that you've just described it. Then, do you think that it was? Well, actually, moving. I think I was going to ask a question that you already answered in your answer. What did you have a particular favorite band that you enjoyed working with more than any other?
I've had several favorite bands. I mean, I all the ones we've already mentioned. I enjoyed working with a lot. With I said probably with the exception of Manfred Mann, which I've mentioned. But the Pentangle were brilliant to work with because every one of them was top of their particular instrument or vocal, as the case may be, and that was great fun to do. I enjoyed that a lot. So Creation were one of my favorites to work with because of all the reasons I've already given you. And there certainly have been others. If I have to sit down and think about it, I don't know. Hang on, this is a spam call, and then we just hang it up. 5, 4, 2, 3. Okay. Yeah, there certainly have been others. I mean, hell, you've seen my discography. I'm sure you could probably suss it out for yourself.
Fantastic answer. I think you're probably right. I probably could. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So, just finally, what do you have a piece of advice that you were given or that you enjoy passing on that you think would be appropriate for sort of budding producers, if you like?
Well, let me gather myself here and see how I can say this properly. I think one of the major pieces of advice I can give anybody who wants to be a producer or an artist, for that matter, is that they should be totally aware of their own capabilities and not try and fool themselves. If I mean, we've all known, I'm sure you have also, there have been singers, so-called singers, who couldn't sing a note to save their lives, but thought they were brilliant, and so they're kidding themselves. I think that's one of the major things, is that you got to know what you can do well and what you can't do well, and that's the best advice I could give anybody. If you stick to that kind of situation, then you will come out with good things.
I think that's a really unique piece of advice, and it's probably something that is often overlooked. And I guess people are frightened. Well, on both sides. So if you're the person that you're referring to, then you're frightened to admit it to yourself that you can't do something. And if you're maybe an inexperienced producer that's working with an artist and that's happening, then you're perhaps frightened to address it with them.
Okay, well, I'm sorry, but I hate to disappoint you, except that I've never been frightened about that, because I think I've always known what I could do well, what I can't do well. So the people that kid themselves, I don't really have a tremendous amount of respect for.
Well, yeah, and I guess rightly so. Okay, so just sort of finally to wrap things up, I know that we spoke about this before I'm actually going to start the sort of podcast, before I did my intro, but you're documenting your career on Facebook with some really well written, I don't know what you'd call them, sort of anecdotes, and that's happening weekly or every so often. Is that what's keeping you busy most of the time nowadays?
Yes, I started. I thought it was time. The reason why I got into this is because of the fact that, because I'm bored, and secondly, because I can't get in the studio when I want to because of the pandemic, and thirdly, because I decided that it's probably a good idea to reintroduce myself to a whole bunch of people who probably thought I was dead. So. And I chose to do this because I thought that's something I can do. I mean, my memory is still working pretty damn good, and I can. There's a lot of stories, because there always is a lot of stories. I've been at it, so I started doing it, and I actually am thoroughly enjoying it. And thanks for saying that the writing is good. I'm pleased about that. It's good.
Oh yeah, they're really enjoyable reads, and it makes. I mean, to be honest, it makes a change when you're scrolling down your phone looking at absolute rubbish and you see something like that comes up where actually is really good and really lovely piece of information to read. It makes my day when I see it.
Good, thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, it's been fun, and I'm doing the weekly, major thing, and I'm also started doing smaller bits during the week that probably won't fit into a major article like I'm doing on a weekly basis. And in any event, it gives me a chance to talk about bands or artists that should have made it that didn't, because that's I wouldn't want to do that necessarily for a whole article on a weekly basis. So it's given me more latitude and flexibility. So that's what I've been doing.
Oh, cool. Is there potential for a book to come out of any of this at some point?
Well, I like anybody who's been around as long as I have and have had hits, have been asked, when am I going to write a book? And I've always said, and because I truly believe it, I've never thought that I think all the stuff I've done was worthy of a book. I didn't think it was interesting enough. I still don't. However, what I'm doing now, doing these vignettes, I think are collectible into a book, and that's what I'm hoping will happen.
Okay, I think that's a really that would make for a really interesting read. The sort of tidbits that you particularly remember. I think that's really cool.
Right. Well, yeah, exactly. If somebody there's a publisher out there who's interested, and they'll probably put them in sort of chronological order, and which is fine. I'm keeping at it. I will continue to do this until I run out of stories, and at this point in time, I don't think I will. But who knows?
One final question, and I'm kind of a bit nervous to ask it, but do you are you listening to any music now, or what do you listen to, or does anything excite you musically now?
Oh no, I listen to music all the time, including I am keeping up with some of the, in fact, not some, but a lot of what's happening currently, most of which I find unlistenable to. But there is rays of sunshine coming up. I mean, there's a couple of artists I just listened to this morning who both are doing music in a way. One is Jacob Collier, who's just got his album is going to be, I think is nominated for Album of the Year. And there's a Texas duo called Black Puma, who I liked a lot. They're doing music, and I think it all started. Excuse me. It's all started a few months ago with Billie Eilish's brother, who I think's produced some really good stuff, and he's doing music, which is great. And of course, this industry being a copycat industry, lots of people have started copying doing music. So I'm pleased to hear that.
Again, a really nice way of putting what's happening in the industry right now. I think that's fantastic. I don't actually know Black Puma, so I'll check them out. But I know Jacob Collier is unbelievable.
Yeah. No, I really like what he's done something new with jazz, mainly jazz with American songbook type stuff, and I think he's done a hell of a good job.
I agree, and he's just such a talented guy. He seems to be able to turn his hand to any instrument. It's unbelievable.
Well, this is another thing. Since he's apparently a multi-instrumentalist and apparently good at all of it, and I'm assuming he's also a good engineer because he's got his own home studio. This is what's happening today, of course, is that you can't just be an artist. You really pretty much have to be as technical as an engineer in many cases. So I think that helps enormously.
I think it does. Something that's come up quite a bit on the podcast is how I think people can become overwhelmed these days with the amount of say plugins or gear or whatever that's available to them. And you talked about the studio gear that you were using sort of back in the early 60s as being relatively primitive, but in a way.
Yeah. No, I've always kept up with the tech. I think I mean, yes, I could sit down and do digital stuff today. I'm well aware of all the plugins and how to use them and all that kind of stuff. And I have an engineer who is really good, and and since he's a hell of a lot younger than I am, he's been more well acquainted with it than I am. So, but no, he's good. It's been fun working with him, and we use a combination of my old techniques, which he knows nothing about or knew nothing about, and his new techniques, and we've come up with some good stuff.
Oh, cool. Well, it sounds like it's working well. Have you got? Is there projects that you are working on at the moment, or potentially will be working on, or is there anything?
Well,
that you've
I
done
would be working on them if I was capable of working on them.
Yeah.
I do not want to do projects by Zoom. I tried it, and it's a pain in the ass, quite frankly. And I don't think it's particularly fruitful. Yes, you can get stuff out of it, but it's not like being together in the studio. And I really don't want to do that. So in any event, there's virtually no labels that are doing anything in the way of releases with programs for PR and for promotion and all that kind of stuff. So there's hardly any point of doing anything. I mean, unless you're pointed at a specific audience, like teeny boppers or or hip hoppers or whatever the case may be, which is not something I particularly want to do.
No, well, yes, yeah, that exactly. And hopefully you'll be able to get back into the physical studio soon when all of this dies down.
I'm looking forward to that, and I think I said music is coming back apparently, and so which will suit me fine.
Well, I think that's a quite a nice positive note to end on. I appreciate you taking the time to speak to me.
It's okay, Joe. It's nice to be able we actually got together for a change.
So there we have it, Shel Talmy. I really hope that you enjoyed listening to that conversation as much as I enjoyed having it. Really grateful for Shel to give me his time, especially after, as you'll know from the first episode, I got my time differences wrong. I mean, listen, I'm a drummer. I can only count to 4. My maths isn't my strong point. So anyway, yeah, he was really gracious in that and let me speak to him again. And it was really useful and something that, a quality that I really admire in these sort of old school producers, if you like, is they are really honed in on what they're about, and that's it. I think that's a really sort of key lesson to anybody who's listening to this, who's involved in music, or looking to be more involved in music. And it was a big turning point for me as well, that suddenly when you learn to accept who you are and what you like within music and what you do best, that's suddenly when the sort of gates start to open and everything is sort of like that proverbial thing of where everything starts filling with colour and it all takes off. And Shel is a great example of somebody who knows his mind and is forthright in his opinions, but is at the same time extremely personable and understands the dynamics between people. But ultimately, musically, he knows his mind and is confident with who he is and what he does and what he's about. And that's a quality that seems to be prominent in every single one of the producers that I speak to. So yeah, I thought that was worth pointing out. I should also note that I am in love with Black Pumas. They're absolutely amazing. I would love to get one of those guys to come and chat to me, or I need to find out who produced their records, because it's proper old school way of doing things. You can hear how it was all put together. I hesitated there because I was listening to an interview with a producer called Dave Cobb, who hopefully you're all aware of. He's works on a lot of country music, but is very old school in the way that he does things. And he was chatting to Rick Rubin, and one of the things that he said he likes about music is he likes the rough edges, and I love that. Absolutely love that. The rough edges is it, and Black Pumas have rough edges. So yeah, go and check those guys out. Not to be confused with Black Puma, who is a reggae group and only has about 2 singles out, but I did end up listening to them for a bit and thinking, I'm not sure. Anyway, yes, Black Pumas. So next episode, I'm chatting with Simon Trout, who is the owner and chief engineer, I suppose, of Soup Studios, which is a studio located on a massive red boat just near the Millennium Dome in the centre of London. The Millennium Dome. Do people call it that anymore? It's called the O2 Arena, I think it is called now. And again, Simon's somebody that I came across on Instagram, and we chatted on the phone a few times, and his attitude towards recording is perfect for this podcast, and I have no doubt that you are going to love that conversation, so look out for that. As usual, you can get in touch with me through my website, which is allyouneedisdrums.com. My email address is joe@allyouneedisdrums.com. I'm on Instagram @allyouneedisdrums. And that just leaves me to say thank you to Joe Kane for the brilliant intro and outro music he supplied me with, and my good friend David Henshaw for the artwork that he supplies for me every 2 weeks. So have a absolutely fantastic fortnight, and I will be back in 2 weeks' time. Goodbye!